Welcome to Check It Out with Jessica Lee. I have the Chief Revenue Officer of Yapstone here with me, Kurt Bilafer. Welcome, Kurt.
Thank you, Jessica. Very excited to be here.
So tell us what this marketplace that you're targeting for Yapstone. What is it?
Yeah, so Yapstone is really focused on offering integrated payment solutions for what we call the platform economy. And marketplaces are a type of platform. So one of the things that we've seen is that as marketplaces have evolved, the payment requirements that they're looking for, so how they get money in and how they disperse money, and basically the fraud mitigation, the risk mitigation process through all of that has evolved rapidly. And a lot of the early entrants to that market really started off with more of a consumer, meaning a one-sided transaction, like the merchant and the seller, and they both know each other, like a traditional e-commerce site. But in these marketplaces, there's really two parties, we call it the demand side and the supply side, and an intermediary, which is the marketplace itself. And so processing those transactions and making sure you know enough about the transactions and the parties involved becomes a lot more complicated. And that's really where Yapstone shines.
Okay, so for example, HomeAway, which is an Expedia property, you are the engine behind that for them.
That's right. So we process transactions for VRBO and HomeAway, and that's a lot of what we help do is make sure that the properties that are being listed are real, the people that are listing them own those properties, and the people that are staying there actually intend to stay there. We know who they are and when they're arriving and when they leave, and making sure we know enough about both parties on the outset, but also the transaction to make sure there's no collusion fraud, stolen credit cards, all the sort of bad stuff that happens online. Because most of those transactions are happening, they're not in person, right? So they're online transactions versus in-person transactions.
So the trust and safety, that's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. To marketplaces, trust and safety is just paramount, right? When you book something, it doesn't matter. We met with a company called BabyQuip yesterday, a marketplace that basically allows families to rent baby equipment when they travel. It's a really cool service. You want to make sure the product that you're getting is real and the person you're getting it from is real and it's going to work. But you also want to make sure the person that's renting it is trustworthy and is going to return the item at the end of the stay. And so I think trust is really important. Trust is really hard earned, so it happens over a series of transactions and it's easily lost. And so that's where marketplaces, we were at an event earlier this week called the Marketplace Conference, and that's a lot of what they talked about, just how paramount trust is. And in the early days, trust really comes through in the transaction, right? So that exchange of the money. And we think of like our early days of like Craigslist, where you'd list something and you'd go to the McDonald's parking lot because you didn't really know who was going to show up, and you wanted bright lights and people around, and then you traded something and it looked like it was like a drug deal because it's like cash and I got something in a box and I leave. Like the marketplaces have evolved tremendously to now where they're processing hundreds and thousands of transactions. How do you do that at scale, and how do you make sure the trust is there? Okay,
so I know you are doing like $20 billion of transaction a year.
Yep.
So you're doing well. You have a lot of clients right now, but you are growing, right?
Absolutely. So, Yapstone's been around for a long time. We got our start building what we call vertically integrated solutions for both rent and vacation rental payments. And then we started to evolve to providing more of these marketplace solutions because we could see these needs coming, these unmet needs really from these evolving marketplaces. And so that shift has happened and we continue to heavily invest. And so that's part of the reason why I joined Yapstone was I had previously worked for a company that was going after platforms and marketplaces called WePay, and WePay was acquired by JP Morgan Chase. And at the time, I still believe now, there's just this tremendous opportunity for innovation. And when I looked at what Yapstone had to offer, they have like nearly 40 microservices as well as a full stack solution. We could really go from selling something that was vanilla, one size fits all, to really selling bespoke, or sometimes I call curated experiences for these marketplaces. Because every marketplace is a little bit different. Sometimes they want to, pay what they do called advance pay ahead of transactions. Sometimes they want to have different settlement terms or do split payouts. And so all that sort of flexibility is really important to the marketplace to support their model. So that's why I've joined. And so part of my charter is to continue to grow not just the revenue, but the team associated with it. So I've been on board for 4 months now. I joined in December. And there's aggressive growth plans. So just in the sales and marketing organization, I think we had to hire like 25, 28 people in the first 6 months. Thankfully, I've got through the first tranche of my first 90 days. But we basically have 20 people we need to hire in the next 90 days, right? And those are for sales and marketing roles and pre-sales and post-sales, because we continue to see just a ton of demand for integrated payments.
So that's a pretty broad responsibility you have. Most people own just revenue as in customer sales, right?
Yep.
And now you actually are saying you own the lead generation part, the brand awareness and all that, from marketing to sales to actually customer success, the
Absolutely.
full journey.
Yeah. So I am the one throat to choke. So the only person I get angry at is myself in the process. No, it's a great opportunity. And I think one of the things, for the 20 plus years that I've been really focused on sales and satisfying customer requirements is that there becomes too much of this disconnect and kind of the blame game that happens, particularly between sales and marketing. So I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to run two really great teams that are focused on solving that problem. And because I can resolve the conflict nearly instantly, sometimes I have this internal conflict of like which side of me is going to be right in winning that discussion. The reality is when we come up with value prop, when we talk to customers, it isn't sales that owns the relationship with customers, it's the company that does. So I can easily bring in marketing people and customer success people to hear why are people buying or why are they dissatisfied, which I think gives us an advantage in just kind of innovating very, very quickly on why, what message hunts, why do people buy, and make sure that we don't just talk about in the market in part of our lead generation and market awareness, but all the way through the sales process and make sure that, because I also own the ongoing delivery and relationships, that the customers are realizing that benefit. And so that gives me, I call that the journey of payments with our customers. That gives me great sort of purview into what's happening and where we need to go address issues.
And then is the pricing model like a percentage of the transaction? Yeah,
so typically what we do is either interchange plus pricing. So it's some people call it cost plus pricing. But yes, we're basically benefiting from after card processing. There's a bunch of value added services we layer on, and we get a percentage for each transaction that gets processed.
Okay. All right, excellent. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing then? It's a crowded marketplace, and there's some well-known competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just an awareness of what do marketplaces or platforms really require in terms of payment solutions and processing. So what's interesting is, the first payment solution we all think about is probably PayPal, right?
Yes.
And particularly for someone of my age, like that when that came out, that was like revolutionary, right? But there's all sorts of things like Venmo, and there's all the wallets, Apple, Amazon Pay, Android Pay, Samsung Pay, everybody has those. And then when you get to these multi-sided marketplaces, what ends up happening is people have implemented a lot of those solutions designed for traditional e-commerce. And because it's not really a marketplace payment solution, there's a bunch of risk that happens on their platform that they're not able to handle. So oftentimes what ends up happening is they cobble together 15 or 20 solutions to try to address that versus just going in and actually making the decision to implement a platform payment offering.
I see.
So I think awareness is one of those big things. And the second thing is a big part of the value prop of marketplace payment solution is really twofold. One is that you can monetize the payments, meaning the marketplace can benefit from the transactions that they're creating, and they can use that revenue to offset either marketing incentives or operational costs. But the second thing is these marketplaces create a bunch of inherent risk. And if they don't mitigate that risk or they don't address that risk by kicking off the bad actors or doing the right level of underwriting, something can happen. And typically that something is like the government or some sort of regulatory or a headline in the Wall Street Journal or something that then introduces tremendous reputational risk for the business that could potentially send you into a death spiral or worst case scenario, just set you back.
What inspires you? What motivates you? What's exciting?
Yeah, so I'd say probably 8 or 10 years ago, I shifted my focus from how probably most people measure their career, which is typically about compensation and titles and recognition, to more influence and impact. And I had a lot of coaching because no matter what I achieved, I was never satisfied. In fact, my daughter had this conversation with me this morning of like, what motivates me? And so I think impact and influence for me are softer things. They're more difficult to measure and to manage, but it is about how you impact the people around you in their lives, whether it's like putting them on the right course or coaching them or mentoring them or just watching them grow. And I think oftentimes the way you see that is when people start either replicating your message or you've made the change in the organization in terms of like a trajectory or a message or an approach. And so those are the things that I look for. Oftentimes, unfortunately, they're all in the rearview mirror, which means I'm a change agent. That's a big part of what my role always is, to come in and bring change. And so as I run through walls and try to storm and recreate things, I get what I call death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? And so then I think I'm not being effective or it's taking too long. And then as I pause, what I realize is I'm just allowing everybody to come along with me. And then that's when I realize, wow, okay, I actually did have an impact. And so maybe I'm getting just older or slower or wiser. It's one of those or a combination of all of them. But now what I'm starting to realize is the importance of bringing everybody along with you. And so influence and impact is super important for me.
you have many years of sales experience, so the impact is also like the sales approach that you teach or coach your team.
Yep.
Is it the challenger? Your thoughts on that kind of approach?
Yeah. So years ago, when I worked for SAP, we participated in the surveys and the study to build the Challenger Sale book, corporate executive board, and I was over in Asia running one of SAP's groups when we actually rolled it out in Asia. And so what's interesting is there's all sorts of cultural nuances. I think Challenger works great in environments where you can sell with conflict, whether it's controlled conflict or others. In some markets, that doesn't work. Like in Japan, that's a hard place to go and be a challenger. But what I really liked is that salespeople started to internalize and reflect on what style they really were. They started to self-identify and take traits from that. So I'd say I'm a little bit of a challenger. In fact, one of my bosses when I was at SAP, his sales tactic was he would take the Wall Street Journal and he would read it before he went into a sales call. And he would always find one article that he would go in and he would reference in a meeting. What was interesting is it made whatever he was saying relevant. It tied back his opinions or perspectives back to something that was factual. And I think that to me is what's really important in Challenger. And I think I always believe in adding value in every interaction, right? So you can call it paying it forward or however you want to look at it. But the reality is the way you establish relationships, because people are still buying from people, even though we've introduced all this technology, is there has to be this value added component. I think Challenger enables you to do that. The challenge is, no pun intended, that you have to do it in a way where you don't introduce friction and you don't introduce arrogance and you don't alienate your audience. And I think that's where people go wrong with Challenger approach.
Right. Some people might get very offended.
Yes. Yeah, because not everybody in the room is wired the same way that you are. And I think it's important to understand who's in the room and to read the room. And typically what I see is the best way to be a challenger is in a small scale and identify who your coach is, right? And so work with them and be confrontational and help them understand what they're doing may not be right or there are other ways to do that, and then let them continue to champion that through the organization.
Okay. So looking ahead, what's your vision for Yapstone here in a couple of years? Yeah,
so I'm not thinking a couple of years out. I kind of live in like these 90-day, these quarterly increments, right? So I think, a big part of what we're focused on right now is really rebranding and repositioning Yapstone for what we do now. Yapstone's been around for 20 years, and people think of us as these vertically integrated solutions. And now as we've put more and more emphasis on a product we call Transact, which is our marketplace solution, it's really getting that word out and educating people on what that looks like. And the challenge of the Yapstone brand and what we do, Transact in particular for marketplaces, we're what's considered an ingredient brand, meaning if we're doing our job right and you go to a marketplace and that's like HomeAway and using our product, you never know it's Yapstone, right? So we the way that we're going to do this, we're going to do this by telling the stories of our customers and the value and the problems that we've solved to get to other marketplaces. So it's a little bit more complicated approach. And so I think, awareness is just always a challenge, whether it's a crowded market or it's just a loud market. It's making sure people understand what that looks like. That's one. Two is it's hard to put a value on keeping people out of trouble, out of jail, out of those sort of things. Like I'm not a big fan of selling fear or selling FUD in general. And so part of it is we have to continue to layer on these value-added components and do it in a way where people understand what is the business impact, right? That it is additive to their business. It's not we're going to keep you out of orange jumpsuits, but there's some goodness with it as well.
Okay. So I know you guys are based in Walnut Creek.
Yeah, that's right, Walnut Creek, yep.
East Bay. And you are hiring in the marketing department, the sales department, the customer success department. So the company is...
Yeah, and certainly on the product and the tech side as well. I mean, all of our teams right now are going through massive growth. We have an office in Santa Monica. We have 150 people in Ireland. And we're hiring the best folks wherever we can. I currently live in Seattle, and so I make the commute down frequently. So, what we're really looking for is the best people that are evangelists and have passion around the change that we're going through.
So there's a total of 400 people, and you're looking to maybe...
Yeah, so I think we're at 450 now, and so I suspect we'll probably finish the year around 550, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
The big challenge with hiring lots of people is you want to hire them and onboard them and ensure their success. And so we're also taking this measured approach to making sure we have the right people and everybody gets onboarded quickly and successfully.
Excellent. Well, hopefully this video will attract more talent for you to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Kurt, for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
There you have it, folks. Take it up with Jessica Lee.